Hello, everyone. Thank you all for coming tonight. We have a wonderful evening planned for you all with two incredibly experienced guests. Our first guest is Joerg Theimann-Linden. He is a green infrastructure mobility expert, and he is coming to us from Germany, where it is presently well past 1 o'clock, and he is putting in a very long day. So thank you, Joerg. And he will be talking about biking and infrastructure in Europe. And we also have Tricia Martin, who's a landscape and urban designer, who will talk about biking and green infrastructure and how it can be effectively created to prevent flooding. After that, we will be doing a Q&A, and during which the whole time we will be filming. So if you don't want to be filmed, turn off your camera. Otherwise, you are consenting to be filmed. And I just want to say thank you to the Landmark. This is our second climate action series with them. They have been wonderful to work with, in particular, Kelly Rins-Bruner. I'm not saying your name right. Kelly Rins-Bruner.
Bruno.
Bruno, sorry.
It's okay.
And, we've really enjoyed working with her, and she's been open to all our different ideas on all our different topics, and I thank you. And I am Margaret Galbraith. I am the president of Transition Town, Port Washington. We are a community-based environmental organization. We are part of a global movement where we are focused and working on transitioning off of fossil fuels. We are working to transition to a more sustainable and resilient community. And ultimately, we are working to transition our relationship to our earth from extractors and owners to protectors and stewards. So with that, I turn this over to my friend and board member, Heinz Rudolf Jufer, for our land acknowledgement.
Thank you, Margaret. As it is custom in our group, we do a land acknowledgement before we meet. And I would like to do that during this event as well. Throughout the world, indigenous peoples are on the front lines of the climate crisis, while also confronting colonialism, racism, and disenfranchisement in the past and present. This land in Port Washington we meet on this evening, the northwestern part of Long Island, has for thousands of years been lived in and loved by indigenous peoples, most recently the Matinecock tribal nation. It is important to note that the Matinecock tribal nation belongs to this land we live in. The big and dramatic changes started in the late 1630s, when individual families and settlers from Europe began to acquire land in this area. Today, due to forced removal, theft, genocide, and broken treaties, the community resides in various parts of the USA and Long Island. We honor and pay respect to their ancestors past and present, as well as to future generations. We, the members of Transition Town Port Washington, recognize their continuing presence in their homelands. May the ancient knowing this land holds of human interconnection with nature awaken our hearts to this same encoding of deep relationship. And may we realize that human rights and nature's rights are deeply connected and have to be realized to maintain livable habitats for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Heinz. So one part of our title is climate change, and climate change is here and now. All you have to do is open up the newspaper and you can see or hear about birds falling out of the sky in India because it's so hot due to their heat wave. And we're heading into summer, and surely there'll be fires in the Southwest and in the West, and we will have a hurricane season coming up that we'll all be preparing for. And according to the UN panel on climate change, we must cut our greenhouse gas emissions by 50% within the next 8 years, and 100% by 2040 to prevent global warming beyond 1.5 Celsius, which beyond which is catastrophic for us. So we have quite a bit of work to do. One of the things that we're going to talk about today, and it's one of the things that individuals can do, is we can, start walking, biking, and taking public transportation. Now, one thing we're going to talk about today is I would love to bike and I would love to have my kids bike, but right now it feels either cumbersome or not safe. So I'm often, sitting in traffic on Main Street, or I know a lot of people are dropping their kids off and sitting in traffic. And this problem's only going to get worse. Our town is growing. There's a development that's already been approved, and there's another one that has been proposed, and there'll be hundreds more cars. And so besides smarter green urban design, because nothing should be constructed on our land, on our waters, we also need to figure out how our streets can accommodate growth. So since Europe is so much farther ahead than us on this, I'm going to turn this over to Joerg, so he can tell us about what they're doing in Europe.
So, good evening, everybody. Seems to function well. So, I will show pictures from Europe, mainly on the perspective of cyclists, while I am a transport planner, mainly to do my job with cycling issues and innovative street design. And I will go through some interesting fields of research and street design, main task, as you know, and Margaret says, cycling has lots of opportunities to substitute car traffic, and thinks that this is my reason to go through. First, I start with strolling around a bit in Port Washington, thanks to Google Street View. And my first impression was, it does not look too bad for cycling, wide street, not those European narrow streets. But on the second view, I saw all these parked cars, and I wondered how I would go from one side to the opposite shop windows, and what we cannot see in Google Street View, to what extent car drivers are regretful to cyclists and pedestrians. And then I found a place that was a bit different, and from European perspective, a bit more vivid and diverse, because in many of these street images, there were very few cyclists and very few pedestrians. And here we see the bus stop and the bus coming and the pedestrian crossing, and in the back it should be the railway station. So if we move over to Europe, first statement is that we have a diversity of cycling cultures in Europe. We have children cycling with their parents in Holland, more dusty conditions in Albania, very sportive in Italy, very safety conscious in UK with the yellow vests and the helmets. And down in the middle, you see one of those fashion ladies in Denmark who cycle all year at all weather. And this is my first remark, that if we calculate this cycling and this and as a substitute for car use, we should think about cycling at all weather, also in winter. It's a bit strange because we are now in a very fine summer season, but I could imagine that on Long Island you have sometimes also rain and dark seasons and cycling. And what's got good news from the colleagues who are dealing with public health they have found out that you have double health effect from cycling if you are not only sunshine only cyclist, but cycling all year. That has to do then with maintenance of winter services to provide good conditions for cycling all over the year. So getting to a bit of theory, perhaps you know from your school time this healthy food pyramid on the left that shows that fruit and drinking is the basis of all, and ice cream at the top is okay, but possibly not too often. And we switched that to sustainable mobility pyramid, and that is shown that cycling and walking is not marginal, but is the basis of all that. And in the very peak, you have a very small aeroplane. That means, again, it's okay, but not too often. And then we have this pedal electric cycle. Pedelec is the professional is the word in Europe for these electric bicycles. That is as well part of active mobility. That means human powered, and non-active mobility. That means motorized. And switching to road traffic safety, I think the main issue is on the driven speed. This is a graph from France that shows the distance where a car is able to stop at 30 kilometers per hour, and nobody can imagine, because it's contrary to intuition, that at that spot a car would hit any pedestrian more or less at the speed of 50 kilometers per hour if it's at that speed. So speed is something that's very difficult to experience, to deal with. Therefore, lots of, more or less all of the accidents have to do with speed, that people are no more able to react in an adequate way. On the bottom, you see activists who have shown these distances between 30 and 50 kilometers per hour on a big parking place. And my favorite spot all over Europe to see and to taste the great transformation is Paris. I think you will have some more hints for any of your European travel, or what you should or you could see where the changes can be experienced. And my favorite spot is Paris. There was an election where Mrs. Hidalgo was running for Lord Mayor, and she promised that 60,000 parking lots will be abolished, and she won the election as now Lord Mayor of Paris, and joined the club of so-called Ville Trente, the 30 kilometers cities, that we have in several European countries. In the meantime, we have big discussion on it in the German parliament. And that means that slow riding 30 kilometers per hour is no more an exception, but it has become the rule. And the exception then is the very big boulevards like Champs-Élysées, that is then signed as 50 kilometers per hour. And on the left and on the right in the minor streets, you have then the rule of 30 kilometers per hour. I think this will be a big progress to reduce the accidents and fatalities especially. And we have very good experiences in Scandinavia that getting closer and closer to this this vision of zero fatalities. And their main measure was to deal with the parked cars, the on-street parking, that are vision obstacles or visibility obstacles, and therefore they practice very strict rules to keep distant when parking your cars from the spots where a pedestrian cross over. We will have that within 1 or 2 years also in the German traffic rules. So coming to cycling, the main challenges, as Margaret also mentioned, are the trips to school. And we found out that especially in the Netherlands, the children are the happiest all over the world, as the psychologists tell us, and it's not because of the seashore and the beaches, but it's mainly because children in the Netherlands have quite a longer trip to school. There are not so many school buses than in other European countries. And to experience the self-efficacy by joint school cycling, like these three girlies that enjoy talking with each other on the way to school or coming from school, this is a condition to grow up in very happy conditions. So they have rain, but it's also a good experience for children if they have succeeded to deal with it. And what does it mean to transport planners? So cycling beside each others. This has become a standard for brilliant conditions for cycling, this communicative cycling. And there's lots of campaigns done with school children to put those walking buses, this joint walking to school on the wheels, or also to introduce traffic restrictions around schools in the school areas, also with car access regulated half an hour before the school starts. So this is then the new very best standard, cycling beside each other, cycle highways, and so on. And the main discussion we have while drafting our technical guidelines is how to deal with less space. On the bottom right, if you have your own lane, it's fine, but it needs space, and in many cases it is not that easy to gain this space from the carriageway, and therefore we will talk later on mixing all these modes. Mixing all the modes, this is quite new in many European countries, is so-called cycling streets, bicycle streets. It started in the Netherlands with this traffic sign where car is a guest, and it shows that at low driven speed cyclists have now not really the priority, but they have equal rights, and cars are not allowed to overtake, and so on. I think we have those bicycle streets spreading all over the country, and the city of Bonn, where I live, I think the number of cycling streets has now more than 50 streets now. We should not forget, beside the riding the bicycle, to store your bike, to park your bike. Here are some examples where also bus stops were combined with bicycle parking. Very special is the new movement of using electric bicycles for longer distances on the countryside to get to one of the express buses stops, as you see at the top right. This bus runs over 80 kilometers to the next biggest street and provides coffee and newspaper, and this combination of electric bicycle and very fast buses, I think this will be the solution in countryside where you don't have the railway system. The main purpose of the public transit operators is that the catchment area is widened compared to walking distance, and even with the electric bicycles, even more than with the ordinary bicycle. So we started in Europe with building boxes around each bicycle to have them safe from theft and from bad weather. But in the meantime, these single boxes were too time consuming. Also, if you have an electronic system to reservate your box for a certain time period, but the better solution will be to have one big box over let's say 20 or 40 bicycles with limited access with your mobility card from the transport operator. Here you see that those larger collective bicycle parkings also could be designed quite well in these examples from France and from Sweden and Austria. The very top in Europe with bicycle parkings are the Netherlands. They're steadily building, redesigning their railway stations and building huge bicycle parkings for the main reason to reduce the workload of the buses in the morning peak hour, to save drivers and vehicle costs, while people coming out of the main station take their second bike stored there and then going the last mile to their workplaces. And the top end is the railway station, new built in the city of Utrecht, where the capacity of the railway station parking, together with the technical town hall and library and so on, has raised up to 22,000. It's costly, but it saves a lot of money on the other side, reducing the workload of public transport in the peak hour. And it's well designed, as you see. You check in like in a hotel, and then you check out to be guaranteed to have your own bicycle and not any theft in the meantime. But also in the Netherlands, we have seen that during the transition to sustainable transport, the number of bicycle parkings is growing, but the use is growing faster. Therefore, the new strategy of City of Amsterdam means more cycling with less bicycles. So coming to this sharing system, and like you have it in the car sharing, the bike sharing systems have become very familiar more or less in all parts of Europe in the meantime. That means that possibly in the housing areas you have your own bicycle, but if you go to city center, if you are an incoming commuter, you get your rental bike, or if you go for leisure, you take one rental bike from one station to the other. And or if you have an industrial estate far away from the next railway station, you can take your bike for the day that you work there to the industrial workplaces. I think this would be a very fine idea to combine it with leisure and tourism also in Port Washington, because Port Washington is very fine linked by railway. So we have lots of discussion to acquire a space for cycling and for parking, and therefore in every city and town and village we have a very difficult discussion about the parking lots that should be substituted by any other reasons, by restaurants in the top, or also to increase the number of people gaining from it by putting, let's say, 8 bicycles on the place of 1 car before. And the main argument will be mainly for the retailers that mostly are a bit critical about that the wallet density is increasing, and where this was done, and also parking volumes saved for those who are not able to take a car. These mainly are success stories to redesign the streets, and possibly the main street in Port Washington, after you have discussed it, might be also a switch to a more comfortable and more visible shop window when there are no cars standing in front of it, but a bench and a tree and so on. Yeah, coming to the experiments, mainly it is first tried out for a temporary part, that those who are motorist critical are not hurt too much, but can be now redesigned afterwards, very provisorian. We have lots of those civil society actions also in Cologne, my neighbor city, where the so-called Tag des guten Lebens, the Good Life Day, is going year by year from one district to another, and where people can experience that for one Sunday the entire district is car-free, and people have their street parties there, and on Monday morning it looks like before, but the images and the experience, especially from children, that their environment could look totally different, will stay in their minds. The other temporary solution you find, for instance, in Stockholm, where you have hard winter in the north of Europe and very fine and public summer. Also there, you have these experiments, so-called summer walking streets, where a street in one district or another district, one after the other, to taste, to take out, is closed for car traffic for the entire summer, to encourage the restaurants there to have more space and people meeting and talking to each other. So coming to a new movement in the my professional association in Europe, so-called shared space. This goes very far in the attempt to mix all modes, and that means that it only works if car driving is very, very low speed, because it looks like a pedestrian zone, very simply spoken. And when car drivers see that there are really enough pedestrian there, if there's no pedestrian, it makes no sense to have these well-designed mixture. On the bottom right, you have a station square in a town in Switzerland, where they put the benches very close where the cars are on the way, and therefore car drivers see here there are people, there are pedestrians, and slow their speed. Therefore, we have a traffic sign especially for that. In the meantime, it was introduced in 5 European countries and to the traffic laws, and it is mainly practiced in the towns, not in the very big cities, because the towns are in competition to each other, and especially the retailers are itching for those redesigned streets, because they have found out that it's very easy to go from one side of the street to the opposite side, to the opposite shop window, and people are feeling comfortable and spending much more money than before if they stay there, if they not go through and disappear as fast as possible, but if they stay there. So we have, in my professional association, have experienced about 200 cases all over Europe, and by the end of the day of this week, we have another meeting to draw exclusions of our excursions and redesign the draft of the technical guidelines of tree design for Germany. Last aspect is that we have new challenges from climate change. Not only saving energy, but adaptation is a big matter for my colleagues. And Tricia will talk about that later. Here's some images to show that bright surface with shadow is important, that biomass in the streetscape is important, and if possible, sometimes it's costly, but important for the children to introduce water to the streets. And my last slide, you have a longer version if you are interested in. You can look it again in the slide series. I also offer some literature and links how to know more in English language. What are the recent experience in Europe? But last slide from my side is that we expect this autonomous driving, these self-driving cars, and we're discussing a lot what that means. That means a lot of more space because the parked cars will be reduced, but on the other side, we expect traffic jams for those self-driving cars because they are so terribly comfortable. And I could expect that in future also people that are riding their bikes today will switch to the monomodal, very comfortable day and will get couch potatoes finally. Therefore, for health reasons, the challenge now is to establish a very convenient cycling system where cycling is fun as soon as possible, to be with the cycling system before all these self-driving cars are introduced. So thank you for your listening, and I will waiting for your questions and comments after the next presentation of Tricia's. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joerg. I love so much about that presentation. I love seeing the kids riding together and the car-free days. And what I like one of the most, because I know a lot of people are very concerned about our Main Street, is that we will be able to, that it will help our merchants for people to have bikes and people can walk across the street. So we are now looking at Tricia's slides. She will be showing us a wonderful presentation. She will, and I'm going to do the introduction because I missed it last time. Tricia Martin is an associate principal at the local office Landscape and Urban Design, where she leads complex urban projects ranging in scale from the region to small lot. Before coming to Locale, Tricia led the Green Infrastructure and Resiliency Guidelines for the Brooklyn Greenway and the award-winning Resiliency Feasibility Study for the Gardens Rising project in Lower Manhattan. So I turn it over to Tricia. I'm looking forward to seeing your presentation.
All right, thank you so much, Margaret, and thank you for, the town of Port Washington for inviting me to speak this evening with Joerg and this incredible audience. I apologize if there's any extraneous noise. I'm home with 2 other people also on Zoom calls this evening, so hopefully they leave me alone in my space here. So can you all see my first slide, designing with and for water, just making sure all of our technology is working here? Can you see it or not? Okay, maybe not.
Yeah, okay. It's okay.
I can see it.
Okay, you can see it. Okay, great. All right, thank you. Just making sure. All right. Again, my name is Tricia Martin. I'm an associate principal at local office, Landscape and Urban Design. I am a licensed landscape architect. I'm also an urban designer. I've been working in the profession for nearly 20 years. We are a small Brooklyn-based office. But we work on a range of projects from small urban vacant lots to large regional planning. I would say that at the sort of center of all of our work is sort of resiliency at multiple scales, and looking at to steal a great phrase from Joerg the last time I met with him, thinking about how we well-being can be integrated into beauty. And I think that's a really wonderful way to think about the work that we do. And I think I'm so inspired by the work that Joerg is doing. And, as we think about, our, Port Washington and other cities in the United States and my work that I'm doing in New York and New York City, I look at those images of Europe and I think we're getting so close to being able to roll out similar, visions here. And we have shared streets program in New York City. We're starting to look at opportunities where we can minimize the amount of parking we have on our streets. So I think that, it's very exciting to see what's happening in Europe. And I do think that a lot of what's being shown today is coming to the United States as well, as our needs are similar. And so I'm going to show a body of work today. I'm going to show a few projects that are part of a body of work at a range of scales where we really look at green infrastructure and water as being integrated into the sort of placemaking that we do, whether that be a streets, and there's going to be a focus on streets and mobility, or whether it's a series of small vacant lots, or whether it's a parking lot. And I think that some of the projects we'll look at today will be applicable to what you all have also going on in Port Washington and in the communities that you come from. So, one project I'm going to share right now is a project I worked on quite a while ago when I was the owner of my firm called We Design. And it was a resiliency and climate adaptation plan for the Brooklyn Greenway, which is a 14-mile route that really hugs the coast of the East River from northern Brooklyn to the Owl's Head Park down in southern part of Brooklyn. And, one of the things about greenways that I think is so interesting is that they're one of the most growing open space typologies we now have in our cities and in our suburban and urban communities, because it's really some of the land that we have left. A lot of the big open lots have been usurped by development, mostly residential development. But we do have stitches of vacant properties that are industrial lots along waterfronts, as well as we have abandoned infrastructure, whether they be rail lines or utility corridors, as well as we have streets. And so streets are being stitched together to form greenways as well. And so one of the biggest challenges in thinking about greenway design is how we keep the green, how we get the green in the greenway. So in many, a greenway is really a sort of separated transportation or linear corridor that's separated from vehicular traffic. And that separation can be done through a series of mechanisms, bollards, for example, or planting. One of the goals of this project was to think about how we use the armature, the sort of structure of the greenway, as a way to capture more stormwater from even a whole neighborhood. And so this diagram on the right is really showing the greenway running along the waterfront, and then these cross streets where the water would flow down the cross streets towards the lowest contour along the water and capturing some stormwater that's happening. So a sort of sub-watershed approach using the greenway, a sort of corridor street, as a way to collect more stormwater. And so, as part of our methodology, we looked at all the different conditions in which this greenway passed through. So sometimes it went along the waterfront.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
We only see the first slide. Is there more?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, you guys have to please tell me that. I've been through tons of slides. Okay, 1 second.
Okay, I texted or I sent it to you.
I'm sorry. I'm in the zone. So give me a second.
Okay.
Why is it doing that? I'm going to stop sharing for a second. Let me fix this. We've done this a million times, yet somehow. Okay. We're going to start from the beginning. I'm in Zoom. I'm going to share my screen. All right. Do you guys see a map?
Yes.
All right. Now, do you see me scrolling my images?
Yes, I saw some movement, but we're now in greenway conditions.
Yeah, okay, so I'm scrolling. I don't understand why you guys didn't see scrolling before. Okay, anyway, here we are. So maybe I just can't do it in slide view. Okay, so, I'm not going to go back up, but basically the idea is that we were looking at all the different ways in which the greenway the conditions existed. So sometimes they go along a waterfront, sometimes they go along a park, sometimes they just go along a large wide street, sometimes they go along a narrow street. So, really understanding the different conditions along the greenway. And then we have our green infrastructure toolkit, right? And these green infrastructural strategies are really looking at ways in which we can address upland flooding, big storms like Ida, for example, but also, coastal flooding, storms like Sandy. And I'm sure as you all similarly experience this type of flooding, there are various strategies that we can use within the right-of-way, within the street, within our greenways to address these problems. So we've got bioswales, we've got porous paving, we have conveyor systems such as service channels and other sorts of trenches for upland flooding, and then we have for storm flooding, we have levees, living breakwaters, wetlands, et cetera. So we weren't trying to reinvent the wheel as far as creating new strategies, but we were trying to think about how we might then integrate those into the Greenway. And, and also understand what are the beneficial outcomes. So if we start to integrate some of these strategies into our Greenway design, bringing that green and blue into the Greenway, we might be able to address storm surge protection, heat island, stormwater infiltration, carbon sequestration, where we're actually using plants to sequester carbon out of the air. And we started to see all these beneficial outcomes. And so, sorry, going the wrong way. So again, this is the sort of the framework was identify the condition, identify the appropriate typology, and then understand the outcomes and even measure those outcomes. So we studied and we applied this framework to Red Hook, an area in Brooklyn, New York that got flooded substantially. We did our due diligence with lots of site analysis to understand the opportunities for being able to implement green infrastructure, depth of water table, the type of soil we had, toxicity in the soil. And then, of course, we looked at our flood maps. We understood where our existing trees were and identified a route that would be appropriate along street property, not unlike I'm sure many streets you might have along your waterfront to begin to implement the strategy, the master plan. And so here you see a master plan of where we're running this sort of the alignment and route of the Greenway about a block off of the waterfront and looking at the different strategies that we could use to both collect, move, upland water, and then obviously prevent coastal flooding from flooding this neighborhood. It was important to quantify what we were doing. So we actually we quantified how much water in a specific rain event would be falling in the water catchment area to then identify how much water we would be able to manage from our green infrastructure solutions. And these are just some plans looking at that design conceptually, where you've got a typical street condition next to a wetland and really trying to think about how the wetland becomes part of a system of moving and capturing and infiltrating stormwater, to then what you could do in a park, where you could then begin to elevate the Greenway to become actually a levee and part of a storm protection system, but that also addresses all the benefits that we were talking about before. So I think that, greenways are underutilized mechanism in our cities for really plugging in various strategies that we need to address flooding and climate change. And, sometimes people think you need lots of space to design a greenway. I'm not suggesting they're not complicated and complex, but I think our streets are a good place to start in thinking about how we begin to stitch together streets that we begin to negotiate across that cross section of the street, similar to what we were seeing in Joerg's presentation about the role of cars, for example, or if we start using autonomous vehicles and we have more space potentially for bikes and other kinds of biomass, how we might be able to integrate more greenways into our communities. This next project is a project that's part of a kind of series of projects we're calling Living Streets. And we're particularly excited about this approach to designing streets, where a lot of the beneficial environmental ecosystem benefits that we are thinking about meeting, such as capturing rainwater, adding more biomass, can actually almost be hidden within the materiality that you use to design a great street. And so this is a project actually in Miami, Florida. And in Miami, the events that we consider sort of catastrophic here happen here all the time. So this is a city that gets 4-inch rain events very often. And this was a project that was built quite a few years ago, but continues to stand up to some of the biggest rain events. And what you see here, it looks like a plaza with some big palm trees and a bunch of people, and that's exactly what it is. But what's happening underground is also quite complex. And this is all porous paving, It's a mile-long project that also includes street, that also includes plazas. And what's happening here is something that we call the tree pump. And it's a networked system of trees that are designed with an extensive root network that actually acts as a way to lower the water table. So what's happening is we're adding capacity for flood storage by using trees to actually absorb the water from the water table, while also excavating down and integrating structural soil, a kind of soil that is more gravel-like and rock-like that allows more voids for water. And this combination allows us to use porous paving along with a substrate of soil, of course, that's needed to keep the tree healthy, but also that allows more void and area for holding water, while also taking advantage of that tree network to act as a pump for the actual the water table that often is something that becomes prohibitive for doing green infrastructure. And like I said, we are very much interested in thinking about well-being integrated into beauty. And so for this project, we looked at the conceptual inspiration from water and to think about how that might inform both the color, materiality, and the patterning of the paving. So a lot of our work is really about this integration. It isn't green infrastructure for green infrastructure's sake. It's really about creating places that people want to be in, that are beautiful, that are responding to the local context. And then within that design is all of these ecosystem services. We used above grade benches in the form of rings, sort of mirroring the rings of a tree trunk. That also allowed us to not have to remove some larger trees that were already there, which we wanted to take advantage of in terms of the tree root system. That would also allow that to address the grading around tree roots. And I'm like, obviously tree selection is very important. We want to use a combination of trees that we know will have an extensive root system, while also being able to address lots of rainwater. And here you see just some construction. It is an expensive initiative. You have to excavate quite a bit down to get the structural soil you need to create this network. But the result has been highly successful. Storm over, rain event over rain event. It does not flood. This was an area that periodically, and this is in Coconut Grove, these retail spaces would be flooded. They no longer flood. And you would never know that this was a stormwater project. And it looks just like you're, an exciting, vital public placemaking project. So we go from sort of greenways to streets to then thinking about how do we take that same concept of thinking about 100% porosity to sites that we also typically design in our community. So this is a project that's in Queens. It's a housing project. It's an affordable housing project that needed to also include some open space, a parking lot, and a playground. And we also were very much interested in bringing alternative energy to this project. So we were thinking about solar panels, and we took the same concepts from Miracle Mile, thinking about 100% porosity, porous paving, vegetation, network root systems, to then create an environment where when there are rain events, along with coastal flooding, here we're actually right on the Atlantic, we would be able to address the flooding. And we are very much in touch with the operations and management folks of this facility, who continue to tell us over and over again that they have no flooding issues. We often do what we call a resiliency system framework diagram, where we think about the whole building and site and how we might integrate solar and geothermal and stormwater catchment as a way of sort of thinking about the whole building as a whole system. And here is a bird's eye view looking at the porous paving here on the left with the rain gardens. The playground system is porous. Here on the right, you see some of the porous asphalt for the parking lot. Here's sort of a close-up look of that. And then here we have the parking lot, which is 100% porous with some planting and your photovoltaics on top. We've been working a lot now on agrovoltaics, which is very exciting, where we're using green roofs and solar on roofs together, or urban farming and solar voltaics together as well. And then this last part of this last project is really about now how do we take those same concepts and now distribute it across a neighborhood using just small lots as a way to intervene. So this is a project I worked on quite a few years ago. This was with funds that came out of the Sandy effort with a community group called the New York City Community Gardens Coalition. And there are 50 community gardens in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And this was an area that got flooded quite substantially during Sandy. So they received funds to look at how could the community gardens that exist in this community help the whole community at large become more resilient. And so, we engaged in a very extensive community engagement effort where we met with many gardeners and many of the groups that had gardens here to understand how they currently used their gardens, to think about how we would work with them to maybe tweak things or add elements that could actually make these gardens more functional, as opposed to just perhaps aesthetic or user-friendly. And so we did a very careful analysis of each of the gardens, identifying their existing conditions, assessing each of the gardens in terms of how much imperviousness they had, how much perviousness they did have, how much were they native plants, how many trees did they have, and then began again with a different toolkit, but similar, looking at ways in which with each of the garden, we could apply different strategies for everything from thinking about microgrids. We're very interested in social resiliency on this project. So other sites that could have microgrids so that if the power went out, people could come to these gardens as a hub to charge phones or whatever else they might need. To thinking about just capturing rainwater. We heard over and over again that people needed more water to water their plants, that they didn't want to have to keep using the hydrants and potable water. So a lot of this was really about creating sheds to collect water to then create irrigation. And for a lot of projects, it was really about planting more trees that have deep root systems, so they wouldn't be trees that would be vulnerable during storms, and that trees that would actually have larger leaves to be able to sequester more carbon. These are community gardens that are not so much about planting fruits and vegetables and needed a lot of sun, but really about people being able to get outside and get more oxygen and just address more mental health issues, especially around, and also being social. And then we quantified, each of the projects in terms of how many trees were planted, how much water we were capturing, and being able to make some assessments across the neighborhood at large about the impacts of that project. So, I'm going to close on that. And so, what I hope is that you sort of see from, a sort of cross section of projects that are really utilizing sort of similar strategies around flooding adaptation that really sort of, think about the kinds of patterns we have in our communities. We have corridors, we have long thin spaces, we have larger patches, like large parking lots or large development sites. And then we have smaller sites like our front and backyards or vacant lots. And I think that I hope that all of these examples there's some ideas that could be then translated into Port Washington and some of the communities that you all come from. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And I love the idea of a tree pump. I hadn't heard that before now, so I think that's wonderful. I would love to turn it over to questions, but I am not going to do that yet. I am going to first let you know who you're talking to, because I forgot to introduce. I was so eager to hear what Joerg had to say that I did not tell you who he was, and I want to do that before we move into questions. Joerg is based in Bonn, Germany. He has worked over 30 years as a sustainability urban and mobility advisor, specializing in creating large-scale cycling and walking plans. He helped prepare a new national cycling plan in 2020 for Germany on behalf of the Federal Ministry of Transportation, and he wrote the official technical guidelines on cycling facilities for the German Road and Transport Research Association. So I wanted to give you a little bit of his background because he has quite a bit of experience. And I would like to open it up to questions. There is so much food for thought and conversation here. So I want to see what people have to say. Are there anybody that's ready to speak or wants to ask a question?
Oh, are we wanting to keep Tricia's screen share up?
No. Can we close that, Tricia?
Sure.
Tricia?
Give me a second. Stop sharing. There we go. I had an interesting thought during Joerg's presentation that I hadn't thought about before. When I saw it previously, that I just wanted to, I just got sort of, there's another issue that we're not really talking about in terms of our communities, which is sort of the changing role of retail in our neighborhoods, places like downtown where we go and we shop and we go and at least in the United States anyway, a lot of these shops are being replaced by, are abandoned, or being replaced by more experience economy types of venues, which I'm not saying, I don't necessarily think is a bad thing, but when I was thinking about what you were showing in terms of projects where the parking is being removed and there's now bike shelters, shelters, right? And bike locks and bike infrastructure, mobility infrastructure. I actually think that that could be a big part of this sort of next generation of what a lot of our downtowns will become, because, I don't know if it's a specific Port Washington problem, but it's certainly, I have a house out in Greenport, Long Island, and retail is doing fine. But I think that in general, we're going to see over the next 30 years, 20, 30 years, a big change. And I get excited to think that maybe the combination of how our streets are changing with potential for what we then put into these spaces might actually be something that is quite healthy for our communities, that revitalizes these places. So I hadn't thought about that before. So I was newly inspired by a new train of thought. So I appreciate it.
Thank you for sharing that.
I would like to add a photograph of today's newspaper of the city of Marburg. I show it. Where is it? No. Moment, please. Here it is. Can you see it?
Yes.
The day before yesterday, the city of Marburg University, town close to Frankfurt, became 800 years old. They had a big jubilee, and the main meeting place, because the marketplace was much too small, they conquered the motorway that goes across the city along the river Lahn, and had a party. The right part of the motorway were 400 tables where people could meet. They assembled, as I read here, 50,000 people on this street party, and they called it Tischlein deck dich. It's the name of a fairy tale that describes for these hungry people of former centuries that a special mystic table is at all the time full with food. And the left side of the motorway became a Fahrradstraße, a cycle street. And this is one of the impressions, especially children, that will never forget that they were trapped possibly in a bicycle congestion. And 12 years ago, we had the European capital of culture in Germany, in the Ruhrgebiet, in the industrial area, and they closed for one day the 40 kilometers main motorway linking all this agglomeration, and people said there was 1 million of cyclists on the way, across this agglomeration, and 2.5 people pedestrian having their party, and also very hostile football supporters, soccer supporters of Borussia Dortmund and Schalke 04 joined their tables. That's really incredible. First time in the history of this football clubs that those hostile main football clubs of the region had a joint party. So my conclusion would be, if you have any town festival, also try to link it with mobility issues and to taste the car-free festival.
Yeah, no, that's a great idea. And I think there was some talk about we're going to have a port outdoors, and I would actually ask Mindy, if there is going to be some sort of parade on the bikes. But Mindy Germain is here, as well as several other people from our Climate Smart Community Task Force. So I thank you for coming. So
yeah,
oh, there you are.
I don't know if you can hear me, but we have been having conversations, just like you said. We have these open streets on our main street, and we figured this would be like a perfect opportunity to integrate bike riding. And we're actually doing a bike safety event tomorrow with our police department. And I plan to bring it up to see what the status is, because it's a great opportunity to stick our big toe in the water.
Yeah, that would be great. And I have a question from Paul. What are the first steps in town, like Port Washington, need to take to build a bike culture? So I'd be curious what Tricia and Joerg have to say about how do you think that should begin?
Yeah, my idea would be that the mayor invites all those who are interested to have a bicycle tour to their favorite spots that look like most, and the other spots where changes should have done. And this would be a very fine excursion in very close contact, talking to each other. And the other similar means would be to have an open map where people can fix stickers and colorful spots, and collecting a kind of topography of problems, and also favorite spots. You can also do it in a wiki mapping online, but during any festival where people meet, I think it's much more fun to have an open map of Port Washington with just the grid and no content, where the people are adding their spots to fixing their ideas and their recommendations, where changes should have been, where they feel comfortable or where they feel uncomfortable. So a very simple empirical basis for the administration to think about their priorities.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I also think that, one of the things that happened during COVID, which was really great, was, there were a lot of street closures in New York City. And some of those street closures were actually extensive. They were miles long. And it was an opportunity for people who are normally really cautious or scared to ride their bike, to get out and get on their bike and ride along these closed streets. One of the cool things also that opened up was the opportunity for teaching bicycle riding for young kids in these closed streets. And so again, building a culture is all about the next generation, and trying to make sure the next generation knows how to ride a bike and feels like they can do that safely. So on the one hand, it's even just something so simple as a weekend where you're closing the streets and people are able to get out and they have bike riding lessons for those who don't know. And to, more, I would say, invasive or larger policy changes that, sometimes you just need to change a culture, especially if you're trying to do it more quickly. That might be everything from slowing down the speeds on certain roads to really to creating those separated lanes where it's not just a painted green line and yet you have cars zooming next to you, but you actually have a separation between you and that car. And it doesn't have to be much, but knowing there's a curb, planting, bollards, even a Jersey barrier, it makes a huge difference. And in New York City, the most used bike lanes and bike routes are those that are separated, sometimes just by Jersey barriers that are painted by children or whatever it needs to be. It doesn't have to be fancy, but making sure people feel safe and then giving them the place to learn and you know, thinking about that next younger generation that's coming up, I would say, are other ways to get a cultural shift going.
We have a
Yeah, very important. Just to add a manual on that. What we learned from North America in transatlantic collaboration, the NACTO, N-A-C-T-O, is the Association of North American Cities, and they published a manual called Streets for Pandemic. And that came at a very early stage, and we learned a lot of it and copied it and translated it in European languages. I think there you have all these very simple measures well described in the NACTO Streets for Pandemic.
I just wanted to point out that there was a question about, will there be a bike share here in Port Washington? And Mindy passed on the information that actually our councilwoman, Miriam Del Monte, will be starting a pedal share program probably sometime this summer. So that will be, I think, at the train station, Town Dock, and Manor Haven Beach Park. And then there was a question about how are you safely integrating, from Rosemary Muscali, how are you safely integrating e-bikes and e-scooters into the mix of bicycles and pedestrians? Any suggested best practices?
Yeah, we just finished in a working group of the Association of Transport Planners, a new policy paper, the pedelec adapted infrastructure, and we found out that what is good for the pedal electric bicycles is also good for the ordinary bicycles and vice versa. So there are not so many differences. We also found out from research that these electric bicycles are not really driven so fast, but it's a mode for the elderly to keep their distances, to have visits within reach and so on. So the main spot of integrating the pedelecs into planning is on parking, because they are more heavy. In the multi-story buildings, we have to care for the in-house parkings. So that's a major challenge in the meantime, and has integrated in the meantime into the construction legislation of houses. So the construction permits in the meantime look whether you have a good access to bicycle parking. And these are very expensive, so if you are parking them at the railway station, they should be well stored and with limited access for those who are using it. But normally, I think it's very simple. It's lots of chances, especially in the countryside, to profit from the larger distances that you can go with electric bicycles. But the planning, if you have good bicycle facilities, it's more or less the same.
Yeah, that's good to hear. We are really struggling with it here. We have a lot of very fast motor e-bikes, but also mopeds and motorcycles and e-scooters, all using the infrastructure for bikes, and there is definitely a speed issue. You know, I think you know, regulation. I think our issue has a little bit more to do with regulation and making sure that people I don't, I'm at a loss a little bit because it's become a pretty big problem here in Brooklyn, especially with COVID, all the delivery, a lot of delivery, takeout, motorized bikes, and they're all using the bike infrastructure. And on the one hand, I really appreciate it because I think, to your point, you can get farther distances. It's allowing people who do need to go farther, not using cars, but it also is, it's a bit of the Wild West right now.
You are right. I forgot to distinguish two types of these electric bicycles. After European Union legislation, we have one type limited to 15 miles per hour speed, and also the power of electricity that empowers you is limited to, I think, 250 watts. So from legislation, this is a kind of bicycle with all the privileges bicycle have. For example, for the forest legislation, that in the forest paths only bicycles are allowed and no motor vehicles. And all these electric bicycles that go faster than 15 miles per hour is different else, and it's motor vehicle that are still not allowed to use the cycle paths, for example. And therefore, with some exceptions, Switzerland is outside European Union. I think the safety community has won the struggle versus the bicycle manufacturer lobby that wanted to introduce also the faster, let's say 30 miles per hour electric bicycle. And if we look to China, mainland China, we had a big shift 15 years ago to abolish the gasoline motorbikes. There you have much better air, and but they failed in limit the speed. Therefore, during the last 10 years, we have millions and millions of electric bicycles, but most of them are going too fast and have become a risk for safety. So it's will be the US or the New York state legislation to define what's still a bicycle, what's still allowed to take into the trains, for example, and to distinguish from other electric bicycles that go faster than 50 miles per hour and would be different else.
That would be wonderful to be able to have some speed limits on the electric bikes. David Jakim wanted to ask a question. Can you unmute?
Yes, hi there. Thank you. So Port Washington, we're losing our salt marshes as sea levels rise in the coming decades. We only have 3 extensive salt marshes left. And Transition Town, one of the processes we're doing is we're working to advocate to protect our salt marshes and also to create an extensive shoreline corridor of salt marshes around the peninsula. I want to ask you, what resources are available for us? And what is your advice for implementing a comprehensive salt marsh plan?
I mean, I think you need to, resources. I mean, I think you want to look at, I'm sure that there are some state, maybe there's some county level grants out there. There's there's the Trust for Public Lands. There's the, what does NIFWF stand for? The National Wildlife Fish, and I forget the acronym, that are often they have projects out on Long Island where they are actually leveraging funds for things like flooding or green infrastructure, stormwater management, in leveraging those issues around wetland, building out more salt marsh wetlands. So perhaps there's some resources there to look at. I mean, I think you'd want to also understand ownership. Are are any of these lots privately owned, publicly owned? I think if they're publicly owned, trying to find ways to make sure they stay that way. And every township is a little bit different and has their own politics. But again, preservation in terms of ownership is often, the first step. If it's privately owned, trying to think about how to leverage organizations that purchase lands like that to keep them preserved or in trusts. And if they're public, advocating for how to best protect those lands and enhance them and restore them. Because one, they are certainly critical in addressing coastal flooding, but also all the ecosystem services that come from wetlands for helping in other areas as well. So, I think it's it's almost a different topic from the topic I think we've been covering here, but it would be a whole other slew of slides, and I think resources to share. But I think, we are in a period where there is funding for those, and I'm seeing many projects like salt marsh wetlands being built and restored, and certainly being protected. So I think I'd maybe first try to understand the ownership of whatever's left, or areas where they're not left but could be restored, and who owns them and how to try to protect them.
Very good
Thank you.
advice. Thank you. I did have a question, Tricia. I was just wondering, so, I was living in Brooklyn when Superstorm Sandy happened and Red Hook was underwater. And I'm wondering, how did they do an urban plan? And then call you in? I mean, how was that Greenway put in there? And what, when you come into a space, what is the process? Because we have lots of flooding in Port Washington. As a heavy rain, some of our shorelines are inundated. So I'm just wondering what the process is for a community or a town to get these infrastructure changes.
Yeah, if you look at how few projects have been built since Superstorm Sandy, you can see that we don't have a great process. I think, right after Superstorm Sandy, there was a lot of initiative towards bringing very talented groups of people together to create visions for big projects that would address flooding. It was called Rebuild by Design. It was a design competition, and some of those projects now are getting built. I don't think one of them has been built. So that tells you that the process is slow, and we don't particularly have a great process. The work that we did was really conceptual in nature. The Greenway itself is part of a capital program that's being constructed. And that is really, at its minimum, it's a green striping with it's a symbol of a bike symbol being shared with a street, and that's being called the Greenway. Now, over time, there are embellishments being made where we're adding more green and adding more elements to separate people from traffic. But these are really, in general, very difficult projects to roll out. When we were when we got the funds from the state to look at this project, it was really as a study to say, okay, the city is going to roll out this Greenway capital program. What would it look like? How much water can we collect? We really had to do a lot of the quantifying to make it with the grant money, but what could the Greenway do in terms of impact for stormwater management and flooding? And so it was really more of a study. And we used Red Hook and Sunset Park as the two neighborhoods that got the most flooded that are along with the Brooklyn Greenway as a way to test a kind of framework. And so that's just the work that we did. Now, that work that we did has continued to inspire other projects that have moved farther into implementation. The Economic Development Corporation put out, I think it was the Economic Development Corporation, it might have been the Department of Design and Construction, but either way, they put out a request for proposals for a team of engineers and designers to do what's called an integrated flood protection system, which is really the right approach. It's saying we're not just building protection, we're building an integrated flood protection system, which means we're going to do something along this waterfront that's going to protect you from coastal floods, but it's also going to address upland floods, and it's also going to give you an incredible community amenity. And the goals of that project were to integrate the Greenway into that integrated flood protection system. And we very much sort of put our advocacy hats on for that, to sort of make sure that the team that was working on that project understood the value of the Greenway. Now, years later, nothing is built, and the design proposal is a tiny little cheek wall that barely does anything, and it's hardly integrated. But because of funds and resources and a whole other bureaucracy, that's where we ended up. So I don't mean to be cynical and to say that this is it's not possible. We're seeing great headways and all kinds of other great projects being built, but just to say that the fact that you have this problem in Port Washington and it's nothing's happening. It is complicated, and it takes a very strong leader. It takes leadership with vision and it involves bringing the community in and making sure all voices are heard, to understand the fears, to understand the risks, and then to implement. And you don't have to. It doesn't have to be huge. Things like preserving those salt marshes, great way to start. And then thinking about other types of flood mechanisms, like make all your parking lots porous. That would also help. Those are easy, the low-hanging fruit. The big ones are when you start talking about walls and levees and things like that, because people don't want to obstruct views. There are trade-offs. But the more you understand those protective systems as being part of community and placemaking, the more success you'll have. And yeah, but I guess just to say that it is challenging. And so the project that we did, it was conceptual in nature. However, it has definitely informed projects that are moving forward. And we are now actually working with Red Hook again to take that project that was started and think about how we might be able to make it more integrated. So some things come back around sometimes.
Thank you. I wanted to let Sally Hetch ask her question.
Hi, yeah, I really appreciate this presentation. It's really cool. I just wanted to ask for specifically Ms. Martin, are majority of your projects kind of building off what you just talked about, funded by the city or funded by nonprofits, or is there kind of been a push for, I know you mentioned those like photovoltaic green roofs, which is really cool, from like businesses, or where are you kind of seeing the biggest push for this integration of green infrastructure?
Yeah, it's across the board. So the affordable housing project you saw is really a private project. So it's private nonprofit, and there is some public funds, but essentially it is a privately funded project. The majority of which it is. A lot of local laws are pushing us in the directions that we're going. So we have some local laws and energy that are changing quite substantially, that are pushing us to be able to encourage some of the projects that we're working on to include solar and green roofs and or geothermal. We haven't talked about, this is really not an energy panel, but we're looking at geothermal stuff as well. So I think that there's a few different things that are happening from the policy side, but also from just the demand side. So we also just have more clients who are aware and educated and know about green infrastructure, know about being able to capture water off their roof into cisterns and use that water to irrigate, and want that. And we know we have definitely a lot more clients who want to use native vegetation. They want pollinator gardens. We get lots of requests for things like that for the butterflies and bees. These are things that people are becoming much more mainstream. And then as far as all the rebates and incentives for people to do solar, it's getting easier to get people to want to implement solar. And now that we're seeing examples across the country of these sort of agrivoltaics where they're integrating solar and agriculture, people don't have to decide between a green roof and solar. We can do both. And, part of what we do in our office is look at the return of investment of these types of systems. A lot of people are doing it to save money, but also for the environment. And you need to be able to show that.
And then that's why they called me.
David, could you turn off your?
It's okay. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
All right, are there any other questions? All right, this was, oh, wait a second. I think there's something coming up here. Okay, so yes, thank you very much for coming tonight. I thought this was a really interesting set of presentations, and we will continue on. Transition Town will be continuing to work on these different issues, and I want to, Kelly, can you put on my slides? Next one. So I just wanted to let everyone know that there is a town hall meeting next Tuesday at 6:45 to talk specifically about Port Boulevard school traffic. And I think Joerg gave us a lot of different ideas that we could potentially go and we could suggest. It is a mess, and I would really think it would be great if we could have people from this meeting to come and share ideas, so we can potentially do something than just all sit in traffic on Port Boulevard during school hours or school drop-off hours. Could you do the next slide? And then we're going to be continuing to look at ways that we can get bike lanes and build the culture of biking in Port Washington. So if you're interested in joining a working group meeting, we're going to have one Friday, June 17th at 12 p.m. at the Science Museum of Long Island. And if you're interested in joining, please email paulmerkelson@gmail.com. And if somebody could put that in the chat, that would be fantastic. And then our next big event is we're going to be doing a live at 5. We will be having a all electric induction stovetop cooking demonstration. Our Assemblywoman Gina Silly will be cooking, and we will be basically showing how great cooks don't need gas at all, as we try to move our state to all electric buildings and away from gas and gas hookups. So come, it should be a lot of fun. There'll be music and all sorts of different things. And then David Jaquim touched on this. Transition Town Port Washington is very much concerned about development that is going up on 145 West Shore Road. Right now it is Bay Aggregates, but this sits right next to it sits right next to a nature walk and marshland. There is the Hempstead Harbor Woods. There is a natural area, and we would have like to stop the development and have a long-term vision of this area as a place where we can rebuild or replant our marshes, and we can continue that walk. Millions of dollars have gone into this area to make it, to clean up the Hempstead Harbor, and we want to see that happen and not go in reverse as 178 more units go in. And there's already 1,000 units going on across that are being added across around the Hempstead Harbor. So we need something to buffer all that development to clean the water. So we would like to have marshes there eventually. So that said, somebody is going to, Claire, can you put the petition to sign to say no to the development? Could you put it in the chat? And then other than that, if you'd like to contact us, our website is www.transitiontownportwashington.pw.org, and you can email me at info, or any of us at info@transitiontownpw.org. We are going to be we have a compost collective, we will have gardening, we are going to be starting Citizen Science Project with David Jaquim. So we invite you all to join us and get involved, join a working group. We do a lot of advocacy. So that's all I wanted to say about Transition Town, but I just wanted to really thank everybody for being here tonight, and thank our wonderful speakers for joining us as well. So thank you. And Joerg, thank you for staying up so late to,
Mhm.
to be with us. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks,
Thank you.
Margaret.
Thank you, everyone. Thank
All right.
you,
Have a good
Margaret.
night and a good
Okay.
week.